My name's Sarah Garfield and I'm the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Public Engagement Group co-lead at the UCL School of Pharmacy. And I'm really delighted to introduce this event, Dementia and Patterns in the Fog. So at the UCL School of Pharmacy, we have quite a few researchers who are working in the area of dementia. And while we're aware that medicines have their place, we also know that there are current limitations in the area and that it's important to take a more holistic, patient-centred approach to treatment. So we're therefore delighted to be collaborating with the Healing Arts Initiative and Christopher Bailey, who's the arts lead at the World Health Organization, who will now moderate a discussion of a more integrated patient approach to treating dementia, involving many elements, including the visual arts. Thank you, Chris, and welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Sarah. It's a pleasure to work with you again and to UCL. And thanks to all of you for joining us as part of our Healing Arts Week, where we have a whole series of events this week, of which this one is going to be doing a deep dive into dementia. WHO being involved in arts and health is relatively new for us, and it does beg the question why. And one of the quotes that comes to mind is a quote that I heard originally from Mel Brooks, the comedian, although it's been also falsely attributed to Joseph Stalin. And that's, when a misfortune happens to a person, that's a tragedy. When a misfortune happens to 1,000, it's a statistic. And at WHO, of course, statistics are very important to help us understand the scope of a problem and to learn how a best intervention could be made to help an issue. But understanding what happens to that individual is how we emotionally get our heads around a problem, how we embody it, how we are affected by it, and how sometimes we are driven to action. And so in my introductory comments, I'm going to talk about a few statistics to give the sort of public health scope of the issue. But then I'm going to tell a few personal stories. And then we're going to start speaking to a panel of experts, from a neurologist to art therapists to the ultimate expert, a person who is living and managing with dementia himself. So let's start with a few statistics that many people may not be aware of. 50 million people a year have some form of dementia. Of that, 70% of that is Alzheimer's. There are 10 million new cases every year of dementia. And of the 50 million people on this planet who have dementia, 60% of them are from low and middle income countries and may have difficulty accessing the medications or support services that can help manage the condition better for not only the patient, but for the family members. Dementia has no cure. Dementia is progressive over time. It is a slow motion catastrophe that not only affects the cognitive ability of the individual, but also can have an extreme economic and social impact on the family and on the community. Dementia is also defined not just as a condition, but as an inability to be able to take care of yourself, an inability to engage and enjoy the world because of your loss of a sense of time, of lucidity, of even in some forms of dementia, spatial recognition. So if there's no cure, if the outcome is inevitable, what can pharmaceuticals or drugs or interventions, whether they're in the arts or elsewhere, do to help mediate the condition to lead a better life, to live a more fulfilled life, not only for the patients, but for the caregivers around them. And that's what we're going to be discussing in this session. But on the issue of the arts, the first example of the arts for, in this case, dementia, but any kind of health condition, is using the arts for greater public awareness. And that's a non-controversial use of the arts. And one memorable example for me is a recent production of King Lear at the National Theatre, which was a remarkable production where the actor who was playing Lear actually did a bit of research into dementia and brought out a lot of moments in the text that uncannily seem very much like dementia symptoms, the sudden rages, the personality changes, the slow loss of control of his own faculties projected out onto the world. And using the arts in this way can reach a mass audience to have greater sympathy, to destigmatize the condition, and provide a bit of understanding of what it's actually like, and remove the fear, to humanize it. But the other aspect of what we're talking about here is how the arts can be used as some form of an intervention. Now, in my case, there is a family member that is quite close to me who has Alzheimer's disease. And what was particularly difficult for our family was that this family member, his wife had died just over a year ago. With the onset of COVID, it didn't seem safe to put him into a home. He was alone and couldn't have visitors because of COVID. And so the pressure on not only him, but the family to help make sure that he was safe, that he was happy, that he was protected, was intense. We would hear stories of him calling up a daughter and saying, "There are burglars in the house." And he would describe how he would fight them off. And of course, they would come over and see that there was nobody in the house. It was a hallucination. He had difficulty keeping up with his medication, difficulty keeping up with the food, feeding himself. He had this fear of running out of food and started buying up potatoes, bushels of potatoes, which he would keep on at the base of the stairwell of his basement. And in fact, one time he fell down the stairs, and luckily those potatoes were there because they actually cushioned his fall. We finally decided to, at least for a while, bring him to our house in outside of Geneva. And we explained to him over time what the plan was, making sure he was okay with it, so that he could stay with us for a while. And of course, on the drive over, halfway through, he got confused and began to ask, why was he being kidnapped? And it was explained to him that this was something we had discussed for a while. And he got angry and said, well, couldn't you have told me first? Well, we did. We've discussed it for a long time. And this man, who was very pleasant, who his demeanor throughout his life was mild-mannered and low-key, would have these flashes of uncharacteristic anger and would almost seem like a different person. When he was here, the sense of anxiety of forgetting where he was and wondering how he got here was palpable. During the day, whenever the anxiety would hit, and it wasn't constant, he would typically sit down and take out his money belt and count all of his money, make sure that he had his passport, lay it out on the table, and carefully put it back. And depending on how anxious he was during that day, that might happen 3, 4, 5 times. My son, who would always sit next to him and talk to him, at one point one morning, he turned to him and said, "And who are you? Do you know the young man who usually sits in that chair?" And he was startled. The one time when the anxiety would seem to go away was when he would sit down at the piano. Now, he's played piano for most of his adult life. And when he did play, the quality of his playing certainly steadily declined. There was no improvement in his playing or cognition the more he played, given his Alzheimer's. But it didn't matter, because during the act of playing, there would be an expression on his face of calm and joy, as if the anxiety of not being able to track linear time would disappear. And during that moment of playing, he would feel the joy of the present moment and nothing else. When he eventually went back home, a question came up. Was he still having these hallucinations about the burglars? And the daughter came over to his house and asked him, you seem so calm. You seem so centered right now. Did the burglars go away? And he said, "Oh no, they're still here." And I said, "So why are you less anxious?" And he said, "It's only money." Now, it's nice to think of that as a happy ending to the story. And unfortunately, with Alzheimer's, rarely do these stories follow a linear path. For the next day, he could be equally bad again, equally disturbed. But I think that there is an advantage to using the arts along with science to better understand what is happening in a given situation, both in terms of the science, the facts, and also in terms of our emotional understanding of what's happening. Oliver Sacks once said that the mind is such a beautiful instrument that when it's working, it works so seamlessly, we have no idea how beautiful and complex it is. But once something goes wrong, the mechanism is revealed and we begin to see the beauty. Now here we have some images taken from some UCL colleagues of neural pathways. And what strikes me about these images is, by understanding what's happening in the condition, not only can we have a better sense of control and possibly work towards better treatment or a cure, but we also understand the beauty through what's lost. In this particular image, we're looking at an Alzheimer's image. It was taken in the cortex of a mouse who was modeled on Alzheimer's disease. In the image, astrocytes, cells of the immune system of the brain, are depicted in red. In this disease, they forego their protective roles and become toxic. The green that you see are the amyloid beta buildup, a fundamental hallmark of the disease. And the blue represents the cell nuclei. But to me, it also shows the beauty of what's happening. For me, the arts are not an escape or a diversion from reality, but they are a pathway in your search for meaning, even if there is no cure in our lifetime. To be able to use these present moments of joy as building blocks for finding that meaning as a creative act. That is something that is a truly human capability. I'd like to invite Dr. Claudia Manzoni, who's a lecturer in translational neuroscience at UCL School of Pharmacy, to explain what dementia and Alzheimer's actually is from a medical science point of view. Claudia, welcome.
Thank you very much for the introduction. And I think that you have described quite well what dementia is actually. So dementia is a term that we use to indicate a specific feature that is common to a broad group of disorders. This dementia feature is the slow and progressive loss of mental abilities. Another way to define dementia would be an impairment of cognitive functions, such as memory, language, visual perception, thinking, and so on. So Alzheimer is the most frequent disease of the brain that presents with this feature, with dementia. And so we can say that Alzheimer's is the most common cause of dementia. But it is very important to say that Alzheimer is not the only one disease that presents with dementia. There are really others, for example, other degenerative diseases of the brain, such as frontotemporal dementia, or Lewy body dementia, or vascular dementia, and so on. There are also systemic disorders that might be associated with a form of dementia. So really, dementia is a loss of mental abilities. And in the case of Alzheimer, this means impairment of the memory, but also it means language difficulties, problems with visual functions and executive functions, such as complex planning, abstract thinking, and so on.
Is it true to say that dementia can take, and especially Alzheimer's, can take many forms depending on which part of the brain is affected?
Like all these disorders that present with dementia are different disorders because they affect a different part of the brain. And therefore, the cognitive symptoms, so the type of dementia that we see is different depending with the disorder. But also the non-cognitive symptoms that are associated with the disease are different depending on the disorder. And another important thing is that pathologically, these disorders are different. So if we look at the brain, what we see is different depending on the disease, because the area, the part of the brain that is impacted is different. And if we look into the part of the brain that is affected, what we see that is happening is also different. So the degeneration that we see and the type of changes in the tissue, again, is different depending with the disorder.
Aside from dementia caused by stroke or some form of injury, when it's caused by a condition such as Alzheimer's, what's the current science on what are the possible causes of this? I mean, can it be prevented? What do we know currently?
Well, so unfortunately, there are many theories, but there is not a definitive answer. It is like putting together a puzzle. So we have many pieces. We know of many pieces, but we have not figured out the entire picture yet. So there is still a lot of research to do.
And then the opposite side of that coin is, since we really don't know what the causes are definitively, we aren't that much closer to finding a cure. Is that correct?
Yeah, because of course, to find a cure for a disease, for a condition, we need to understand what's going wrong, and then we can fix it. But in this case, we don't know precisely what is going wrong. And probably there are many different things, not just one. And so, in fact, these disorders, Alzheimer's, for example, is part of a group of disorders that is called complex neurodegenerations. And complex really means that they are multifactorial. We don't know precisely which is the cause, but we know that probably there are many different things that go wrong at the same time. And so you see that it's very difficult to, first of all, to find a therapy for something that we still not sure about the causes. And plus, in this case, probably there are multiple things that we need to consider. And also this is adding a layer of complexity.
Yes, that's really, really interesting. I'm actually going to invite Anne Child to join the conversation now. She's a consultant pharmacist for older people and the recipient of an MBE for services to dementia. And she's going to discuss what can be done with medicines and the limitations of this. So Anne, we've heard from our neurologist colleague that in Alzheimer's in particular, there's very little scientific understanding of the causes. There isn't any clear pathway right now to a cure. Is there anything that, in terms of our present understanding of the pharmacology, that can at least help manage the condition? What are the choices that people have?
Well, that's a really good question, Chris. I mean, following on really from what Claudia was saying, currently there are no medicines that can cure or modify dementia. There have been a large number of drugs that have gone into clinical trials. However, many of them have failed in phase 3, and they haven't fulfilled their initial promise. There are new drugs on the horizon, and they may well modify the disease state. As Claudia was saying, because the etiology of the disease is probably multifactorial, that actually, you know, any therapies that are developed may be complex, which in itself may be difficult for people living with this condition to manage. So currently, there are medicines that can be prescribed that may can ease the symptoms, and they may help for a while. They may even slow down progression in some people. However, because they don't stop the underlying disease process in the brain, eventually their benefit is lost. What I would say is that use of medicine should always consider the global benefit to the individual and not be purely about linked to memory or cognition alone. Medicine is an important part of a person's treatment for dementia. Medicines have a part to play, but they're just one part of a person's overall care, and it's vital to really be considering that the holistic approach to care and treatments of individuals that are living with dementia, because you are striving to support their overall well-being and independence. And if with that approach, then you have a person-centered, a person-led approach to care.
Well, I think what you're saying, Anne, is really interesting and very much in keeping with WHO's definition of mental health. From a WHO perspective, health is not about the absence of the disease. It's about your ability to perform whatever faculties you have to be able to manage the day-to-day stresses and difficulties of life, to be able to contribute to your community, whether that's a family or in the nursing home or whatever, and working towards building the skills and the whether it's through some pharmaceutical intervention or another intervention to give to improve your ability to actually communicate and participate. When drugs are prescribed, they're to improve memory or to calm people. I mean, what are the specific pharmaceutical interventions that people are striving for with the current regimens that are available?
Well, I mean, with the current prescribing patterns, there are a selection of medicines which are prescribed predominantly for Alzheimer's disease, which are linked to supporting memory, cognition, and daily function. Alongside that, there are other medicines which on occasions are prescribed to help support people with distress reactions. I mean, my work is in care homes, and there we are supporting people that are living with more advanced dementia, and these distress reactions are more common due to a variety of factors, whether that's wholly attributable to the disease state or the fact that people are living in a different type of environment. But you know, pharmacological interventions have, in my experience, have limited success with the distress reactions because they are emotionally based. So it is this overall really holistic approach to the well-being of a person. And if you're thinking, and here we're predominantly thinking about things like access to the visual arts, which can be so important because, you know, as a pharmacist, I'm rooted in the science of care and I'm acutely aware of the cost of care. But in the non-pharmaceutical interventions, that's where the art of care lies, that treating the whole person and you know, ensuring that they have access to non-pharmaceutical interventions, which actually build that natural bridge between medicine and non-pharmacological approaches to well-being.
Let's talk about that for a moment. When we hit the boundaries of what medicines can do in the case of people with Alzheimer's, what are some of the options beyond that?
So, I mean, if we're talking about providing well-being and activity, you know, activity is part of normal daily life, being involved, being purposeful, feeling valued, being able to communicate. And I'm not just talking about communication with verbal communication. In supporting access to say sensory things, you open the door to expression, and that for me is, I mean, I can only talk about the work we do in care homes, but you know, that what you are trying to facilitate well-being. And you may know a medicine is helping you, or you may know that the science says that it's going to help you, but the feeling of well-being that comes with some of the non-pharmacological interventions is just as important. It's part of that whole person-led, person-centered approach.
Well, in that spirit, I think it's important that we actually hear from a person who has been managing Alzheimer's for some time. I'd like to introduce Keith Oliver, who's been living with dementia, and he's going to be interviewed with Jen Holland, who he's known for several years, who has been helping him along his journey about the role of his medicines and art therapy, and to give a general patient perspective of what his journey has been. Keith, Jen, welcome.
Thank you, Chris. Hi, Jen. Over to you to start us off.
All right. Well, I guess I might just introduce myself a little bit. My name's Jen Holland, and I met Keith about 7 years ago while I was on a placement as part of my undergraduate psychology degree. And through that placement, Keith and I ended up working together on some projects, including the compiling of life stories written by people with a diagnosis of dementia. I was one of the editors for that book as a student. It was a team of students supporting each individual with dementia. We then went on to work together through a network of people diagnosed with dementia called the Forget-Me-Nots, which enables those people to have a voice in dementia services and how they run, change legislation, speak on at conferences, and to really have an impact and increase awareness around dementia. Since then, I actually didn't go on to become a psychologist, but I sort of diverted into the arts world and set up a photography business. And then through my friendship with Keith, Keith actually suggested to me, why don't you think about running a photography course for people with dementia, which we did. And we kind of co-designed that together. And it was, I'll talk more on it later really, but those sorts of things that we've worked on together since. And then now I'm currently working with a charity called Bright Shadow, who run weekly workshops for people with dementia and their supporters. And these are creative workshops that we have a whole variety of artists come and deliver. So we've had poets, musicians, theatre, actresses, actors, movement artists. So it's really a wide variety of stimulating creative workshops that happen every single week for people with dementia. So it's an ongoing thing. It's not sort of time limited as well.
Is a wild chord and a clear chord that may not be denied.
What's he saying? Hello!
Do ask what the birds say.
I can fly high. Can you?
And all I ask is a merry yarn from a laughing fellow rover, and a quiet sleep and a sweet dreams when the long trick's over.
So I'm going to ask Keith some questions. He's going to ask me some questions. But my first question to Keith is, it's been 10 years since you were diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And in that time, you've both had medication and been able to participate in some different arts programs. I know it's anecdotal, but would you consider your involvement in the arts actually helping to slow the progression of your Alzheimer's disease?
Yeah, thanks, Jen. And it's been a pleasure to know you for that period of time. You've been a great supporter to me and to many others. Yeah, and I mean, in that period that I've known you, I've been promoted through various doses of medication. My two medications I take for my Alzheimer's are galantamine, which I believe is taken from the sap of daffodils grown in the mountains, which if you're going to take a tablet, that's not a bad thing to have. And secondly, I take memantine, and I think they help me. But what I do know helps me is a good psychosocial intervention, many of which are arts-based. I know full well that they help me, not just during the course of the piece of work, but actually subsequently as well. That benefit stays with me. And reflecting upon that, in the conversation with you today, I think the arts have an enormous benefit for people like me. And I do talk about my own experience, but as a former school principal stroke head teacher, I've had 33 years of being responsible for other people and having a notion of the needs of other people, which I've also taken to this current role that I have as an Alzheimer's Society ambassador and dementia envoy in my part of England. So I speak for myself, but also I'm mindful of my experience of my knowledge of other people with dementia. And my mother also had Alzheimer's and passed away with it, aged 82. So first of all, it gives me an outlet for my creativity, something which when I was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, I thought would come to an end. Also, the diagnosis and the onset of the disease has had enormous impact upon my self-esteem, enormous negative impact upon my self-esteem. What the arts does, it redresses that balance and it gives me an opportunity to feel good about myself. It enables me to do something I used to do very easily, but now is more difficult, which is problem solving. Because every arts activity I encounter presents a problem to me. How am I going to do this? Do I want to do this? Is it too hard? And by persevering with it, I get a greater sense of resilience, and it builds perseverance skills and patience skills within me, some of which I think are more challenging to maintain. It gives me an opportunity for self-expression. Being able to express myself through the arts is a real bonus. It's an opportunity for creating and cooperating with others. And you mentioned there the Zest groups that you help facilitate and I attend. And part of the benefit of those is the interaction we have between the group. And many of them are far more advanced with their dementia than I am, and some of them are less so than me. So it's a good mix as well. People come from care homes to join us, and that's an important mix within the group. It presents achievable challenges. The challenges that the arts present have got to be achievable, otherwise one gets frustrated, which is really what dementia causes. The best word to use to describe what living with dementia is like is that it is frustrating. The opposite side of that coin is connections. Connections are the best way to address the frustrations that dementia presents. And that's connections both with people with dementia, our loved ones who help care for us, and also the intergenerational element. And that's why I'm so thrilled that UCL are part of this project, because I've done a lot of work with UCL over the past 5 or 6 years. And the students and the lecturers and the people involved with the university, as indeed Kent University, that you are an alumni from, are fabulous. And that enriches my life as well, because it enables me to become a teacher once again. And lastly, I enjoy it. I do the arts because I love it. I enjoy it. It makes me feel good. It makes me feel well. And dementia doesn't do that. Now it's my turn to throw the ball back at you, Jen, and ask you a question. So I'm going to ask you, what encouraged you to work with people like me that have got dementia?
Well, it's an interesting question because I have to confess that I didn't choose it. I had the opportunity to do a placement as part of my undergrad degree, and when I was looking for placements and choosing, I had to put them in a list of preferences. And of course, like many others in my cohort, kids was at the top of the list. Wanted to work with children, and I had not had older people's psychology on my radar at all. However, I ended up going for an interview for one such placement and thought the interview had gone horribly wrong as well. I didn't think anything was going to come of it, but I got offered this placement, and I didn't get any offers from anywhere else. So I thought, I guess that's what I'm going to be doing next year then. Going into it, I was, I had reservations. I had kind of my sort of encounters with dementia before that had been, my grandmother had passed away from Alzheimer's, and I had a few interactions, or not really much, but I had negative preconceptions around it. So I was kind of afraid going into that year as to how it would be. And what actually happened was that I was blown away by how positive that year was. People would say to me, "Oh, that sounds like really, really difficult. Isn't it really sad working with people with dementia?" And I'd come back to them and say, for the most part, no, it's not. And there are times when things are sad, but actually I have been more inspired this year than probably any year in my entire life. And that's a credit to the trust that I was working in, the NHS trust. We're doing some amazing work with different projects, and having someone like Keith, who has a diagnosis himself, working with them and feeding back to them about this works, this doesn't. So it was a credit to them as well. And my friendship with Keith, of course, has carried on well beyond that placement, well beyond even kind of working directly in the field of psychology. And so, kind of coming a long way around to answering your question, in terms of what has since encouraged me to carry on working with people with dementia, is that I find it inspiring, enjoyable, and the relationships that I've developed in that time. I've actually, many people now that I would be pleased to call my friends. So others like Keith with a diagnosis who I've worked with, but would happily socialize with outside of any kind of formal working. And it's taught me about what it is to be human, and the needs that we all have, like someone else touched upon, emotional needs, and that the needs for acceptance, to have a meaningful occupation, to have love and a sense of community with one another as well.
You touched on a wonderful idea of what it means to be human. Virginia Woolf once said that illness is as much a part of life as wellness. And we forget that sometimes. We become so obsessed with trying not to be ill that we forget that actually it is part of our story regardless. And it helps shape us. It transforms us. And that leads me to my question to actually both of you, which is, now, I've lost most of my vision. I have terminal glaucoma. I have less than 5% vision left. And in my journey, what I found is that it did spur some changes in terms of the way my other senses are processed by my brain, that the way I can create soundscapes, for instance, is different than when I was fully sighted. And my ability to empathize has palpably changed, almost in compensation for my loss of vision. In dementia, in your experience, Keith, and in your experience, Jen, observing Keith, were there any changes that did, for moments or in a small way, compensate for some of the great losses that you've been feeling?
To answer that question, every day is different, and each day has different elements within it, Chris. So there's no one picture that can answer that easily, that an audience could understand. But the best way I can describe what living with dementia is like, and the arts have a part in this, is the metaphor of the fog. And people talk about the fog. It's a widely used metaphor, but I would refine that metaphor for my experience slightly, because it's like driving along a freeway, and at night where the visibility isn't great, but you'll pass from thick fog to patchy fog, and then the visibility will become clear again. And that's how my experience is. I had an email from my consultant just prior to today's meeting, because I'd been in a meeting with him yesterday and I wasn't well. Dementia had got the better of me yesterday, and he emailed me to say, could he arrange an appointment to see me because he was concerned about me. And I emailed him back to say, you need not be too concerned, Richard, because I feel much better today. And I have some leverage over him, by the way, because my consultant psychiatrist, I taught for 2 years in primary school. So I used to care for him and now he cares for me. But that's a human story there as well. And maybe I taught him something, but he teaches me now. But the arts have a really important part to play, because they do lift that fog and they do make the moments lucid, the lucidity greater in them, because often there's an interaction with a task or an interaction with other people. And that really is what helps people with dementia so much. People with dementias who decline are often those who are on their own or within an environment where they're not able to engage, or they're not engaged. Then decline comes greater. My best therapy is to be busy. My best therapy is to be connected. My best therapy is to do things which I can do and enjoy doing. And the arts is by far and away the best platform to achieve that.
Yeah, and sadly, many people with dementia or Alzheimer's are left in a situation where they have so little activity. And I think we'll hear about that coming up. Jen, any thoughts on what you've observed in terms of, because sometimes someone looking at somebody else has a different perspective than the person themselves.
Just what I would add is that what may be amplified perhaps is the emotional response to things, and it can sometimes be a positive and a negative. So sometimes that the emotions can become quite overwhelming, and I think that sort of emotional side does sort of become overcompensated to some degree, but at the same time that the capacity for joy as well in engaging with these things, and the simplicity sometimes of moments that we share in these interactions that perhaps beforehand may have kind of got sort of washed away with the busyness of life, but to take these moments and appreciate them, live in the moment. For example, one thing we did on the photography course was do something called a photo walk, which really was kind of like a scavenger hunt of photographs. So I sent the group out with a list of kind of prompts, things, for example, like man-made, natural, black and white, something shadows. So these things were kind of open to interpretation a little bit. Keith was actually unable to attend that week, so I sent him the list, and he was able to then go out and do his own walk, which he did in the precincts of Canterbury Cathedral. And I think he was a little bit nervous about doing it on his own, but in the end you pushed through, Keith, didn't you? And you decided to go for it anyway. And you came away with some really amazing photos, but also that the experience for you. Do you want to kind of describe a little bit the experience?
What I would say, Jen, in a nutshell, is that it enabled me to tell a story.
Yeah.
And the arts do that. They enable people to tell human stories. And you're absolutely right. I was nervous and anxious about doing it on my own. And having the incredible environment of the cathedral and the precincts was both a blessing and also a challenge. But I was determined to tell a story, and to tell a story in pictorial form without any words. Because so often for people with dementia, words are hard to use, to arrive at. So to be able to tell that story was immensely empowering.
That's really beautiful, Keith. And as I listened to both of you talking about that experience, I think about the intense emotions of people living with Alzheimer's, and again in my own journey, the heightened emotions that I felt. On the one hand, when you have had such a catastrophic event, it seems perfectly natural that people would have an emotional reaction. That's totally human. On the other hand, when it seems that it's actually tied to the condition itself, that your ability to process emotions may be becoming affected. It's not just a reaction, it's a change. And that's why it seems to the outsider that, you know, the personality may be changing. But then there's a third area that I wonder about. And in my experience, as I lost my sight, I found that it wasn't just my smell and augmented and changed in terms of the way I perceive the world, but the way I processed emotion changed, almost as if empathy were a sense-making ability also. A way of navigating the world through an emotional dimension. And I wonder if there are moments of that. What I'd like to do now is invite Diane Waller, Arts Therapy Professor Emeritus from Goldsmiths University of London, and to talk about her experience as an arts therapist. And in particular, I know, Diane, you've worked in nursing homes in Brighton and elsewhere. If you could describe the conditions of the people that you worked with when you arrived, and what the interventions were, and what was the change, if any.
I'm very grateful to Christopher and also Keith and Jen, because you've raised my attention to very, very important issues. I'll just briefly say that my experience with dementia was a personal one initially. My late husband had Lewy body Parkinson's, which is rather rapidly developing dementia. While I was seeking support from the Alzheimer's Society, I met an incredible colleague, Neil MacArthur, sadly died, and who introduced me to Professor Jenny Rusted at the University of Sussex, and we had a coffee and we talked, and we discovered a joint interest, mine from a personal, hers from an academic, about what is going to happen with people who have moderate to severe dementia living in care homes. Her experience was that very little was happening. We were both very concerned about the emotional expression or lack of it. People had really very little opportunity to express themselves or to manage what I know now, I knew then and I know even better now, very powerful emotions that are raised in living with dementia. Keith, and you touched on that, and Jen. We, over a period of a fairly short time, we devised a project in which we would look to see what might be if there might be any value in introducing art therapy to people who are living with, at that point, they're quite severe dementia, actually, they're moderate but quite severe. These were average age of 75 and some were well into their 80s. So to be brief, in order to put this project to a funder, because we had to get some money, we did a tour of the care homes in Brighton and Hove. And I have to say, I was really appalled. I was absolutely horrified, because my abiding memory is of people sitting around in big chairs in a room, staring at a television set which was far too high, which they couldn't see properly, and certainly they couldn't hear. And that was about it. Occasionally somebody came in and did something, read a story, very occasionally, but the majority of the time they were there day in, day out, managing everything that they had to manage in terms of their emotional life and their physical life. And we quickly came to realize that the physical life is a major, major issue which nobody gets to talk about. The things that we take for granted, people in that situation were not taking for granted at all. They were unfortunately having to wear very unpleasant tracksuits, badly washed. They had no control over a number of bodily functions. It was in every respect an awful experience. So we were determined to try to use art therapy, and that would be visual art, to see whether we could help in some way to make their quality of life a little bit better. We talked to those people who were able to talk to us about what they would wanted, and they were very vague about it. They couldn't really see how much good it would be to do any art. They were a bit scared of the idea. Also, bear in mind, these were older people who had not had particularly good experiences of art at school or wherever. And we explained that this was not, you know, in any way to show that you were brilliant at drawing or anything like that. It was just a chance to be together, maybe play a bit with materials and give it a go. We'll see what came from most people. Okay, we'll give it a go. So we did all the ethical things of consent with either the person with dementia or their carer. And we set up regular weekly groups, which consisted of about 6 people in each group. And we had to enlist the support of the care home staff, which I have to say was not always very forthcoming. Nevertheless, we started a project, 2 art therapists, 1 for each group. And in all, we had 120 sessions, weekly sessions of art therapy. What we discovered was, when we evaluated this project, was the most important thing that came from this was the ability to interact, to actually communicate with others. This had not been very easy in their normal setup. They just didn't, they couldn't, they had very little verbal ability at that point, I'm afraid. You know, many of them had very high-powered jobs, but completely lost the ability to speak coherently. So they were very, very anxious. Low self-esteem was massive. But through introducing a range of pretty basic art materials and encouraging people just to make some marks, to play a little bit, to talk to others if they could about what they were making, we found that gradually people began to express quite deep emotions, and things like incontinence, you know, came up as a big thing. You know, people felt awful about this, and they were able to discuss it, and there was a lot of humor in the group. You know, I had some pictures of clay models, actually, of somebody making an elephant, and then the next week somebody making elephant turds and having a big laugh about that. And so the story went on, you know, and so then the group began to share. You know, quite often it was non-verbal. You know, somebody would make something in response to somebody else's thing, and gradually we had a whole conversation going on mainly through these objects that were being made. And there was one point where somebody became, one of the men actually became very upset because we found out why, because he couldn't drive anymore. His driving license had been taken away, and that thing wasn't very recent, but it obviously caused him terrible upset, terrible distress. And he made he made a racing car out of clay, and the awful symbolism is that these wheels kept falling off the racing car. And the art therapist, every week, he would wrap up the racing car in damp, in cloth, so it would keep it, you know, moist. The following week, it would go back and they would put the wheels on again. And this went on for some time with this racing car. And he was able to show just how much that the losing his driving license, like his, you know, his freedom, if you like, you know, his sense of that he could be effective in the world, you know, that had gone. And we found later that that is a really big issue for a lot of people. They lose their license, they can't drive anymore. It's taken away, it's something else taken away. So those are some of the very small snippet from this very long project, which I have to say taught me a huge amount of, you know, what is the most important probably is to enable people in that situation to live life better. You know, we know, sadly, there's no cure. We know it's probably going to get worse. We have a hope, you know, there is a hope, and we were counteracting what I would say is the culture of no hope, you know, because that was there very much so in the beginning.
Well, exactly. And I think one of the things that we often don't talk about is what happens with the caregivers, whether those caregivers are family members or in an institution. And when they become overwhelmed and have no way of engaging anymore, to find some way of opening up that communication so that it becomes a common struggle is a beautiful moment. I think one of the things that you've described too reminds me of one of my favorite quotes from Carl Jung, who said, "Loneliness is not the absence of people. Loneliness is the inability to express what matters to you most." And especially with dementia, where people have lost a great ability to communicate, to find a mechanism whereby they can express again, is such a gift.
I found that the most important and the most touching, and the fact that it was accompanied quite often by humor.
Yeah.
You know, that to actually laugh at something that was really very deeply distressing, to have it out there and share that, and everybody knew, you know, what people, the other was talking about, and those moments, and there were many of them actually, were lovely. Yeah, really, I would say that what Keith said about being busy, also having something meaningful to do, you know, something that takes you away from this bland world of staring at a screen where you can't even make any sense of it. And that was a very big image that I noticed, this wretched television.
That's beautiful. I'd like to now invite Veronica Franklin Gould, who's the president of Arts for Dementia, to discuss her experience and work in the area of arts and dementia, and to also talk about it from a community intervention level as well. Veronica.
Thank you. First of all, I just want to say how hugely in awe I am of Keith, because he speaks as an ambassador so authoritatively all around the world, and stands tall in so many of our eyes. And it's lovely to hear you and see you today. Yeah, I'm going to tell you mainly from a positive angle, the hope and opportunity offered by the arts to improving our health. A decade ago, after a dementia diagnosis, people were left to their own devices as symptoms began to overwhelm home life, and increasingly lonely and traumatized as friends and colleagues drifted away. Yet creative responses, as we've seen through Keith and so many today, remain strong for years. Visiting a museum or gallery inspired by a masterpiece, the experience stays with you as you leave. You're not thinking of personal challenges. You're fired, aren't you, by the experience and by the sensation. Joining an art class in older age, not that you're terribly old, but I'm probably older. learning new techniques, creating works of art in company with others preserves identity, your art identity. And through our charity, Arts for Dementia, inspired by the New York Museum of Modern Art's Meet Me program, we work in partnership with arts venues to develop weekly workshops to re-energize and inspire individuals and carers or partners above symptoms of early stage dementia. And our website signposts is where you can find arts opportunities for both brain health to help protect against the risk of onset and for dementia in the community around the UK. And our early stage dementia awareness training for arts workshop leaders and students enables them to make their participatory workshops accessible through slight tweaks, sort of eye contact, addressing the person by name, sentences brief and to the point. These are such small things, but goodness, they make mainstream arts accessible and normal. I'll never forget how our first participants, her expression as she was so stressed on arrival, became radiant as she stepped into the Wallace collection, the sight of the grand staircase and Landseer's Arab tent beside which we were gathering. I'll never forget the complete contrast between the fraught and the effect of the arts. Monthly arts events are a treat, but engaging each week in pursuits of real interests keep us involved, socially connected. The combination absolutely improving our health and well-being, protecting against cognitive decline. I'd just like to give you 3 examples of museum programs for early stage dementia from our Reawakening the Mind program and a recent Dorset County Museum model. All led by trained artists, guides, give participants the opportunity to look really closely at works of art. As participants put it, we feel reawakened to all this. We thought it was lost. So each begins with a brief interactive discussion to set the context and, as we discussed today, lift the fog of dementia and release the natural creative impulse. They look at masterpieces of art, whatever the period, that magical quality talks directly to the soul and invites participants to create and share ideas. So the Wallace collection encouraged participants to study a painting, for example, then pose for each other and in costume and paint their portrait, to look at fine boule furniture and compare the premier and contrepartie inlay, looking at works as a whole, then examining the structure. And the first picture we saw at Dulwich Picture Gallery by Albert Kuyp called Herdsman. We were told it was the best example. And so that instantly generated a vibrant flow of dialogue. Then our artist guide pointed to what the critic William Hazlitt described as the purple light of the hills, like the down of an unripe nectarine. Amazing thought. Anyway, he then at that thought, he invited participants into the studio to create Mark Rothko-esque washes. What a brilliant idea. Whether you're new to art or you're a professional, creating a wash from a thin base of color offers a range of approaches to express mood. And then the National Portrait Gallery encouraged participants to experiment with different media in front of the portraits themselves in the galleries. That was great fun. And now the Dorset County Museum curators, 8 of them from different departments, ranging from the Jurassic era, the mosaic floors, costume, to Thomas Hardy and Elizabeth Frink, took our training. Interestingly, whereas most participants within dementia enjoyed all the art, one with Alzheimer's used to research the subject each week before the session, which was really lovely to know, to see just how much it meant to him. So as evidence grows of the vital role arts in health and well-being with dementia, I have worked towards achieving direction to arts on diagnosis. Now, gloriously, with social prescribing link workers available to every GP, patients can be empowered to take up arts at the outset of symptoms. So 10 years ago, nothing. Now, straight away, not hide away, but actually take up arts from the beginning, keep connected in the community. So this helps relieve the strain as they await memory assessment for diagnosis of our most feared disease. At least that's my campaign. I'm going to pull out the stops to make sure it happens. I will show you diagnosis. This is the picture. I got it the right way up. This is a double profile, which I commissioned actually to drive the advance of social prescribing to weekly arts at the onset of dementia. So it's a double portrait, a double profile of the same person, one fearful of the diagnosis, and the other enjoying this range of arts as constructive distraction and stretching this wonderful comforting hand of friendship, connectedness to the diagnostic head, whose eye boldly swims across to the arts head. This is the difference that arts makes to well-being that you've been discussing today, that sense of harmony, of social connectivity.
Oh, that's just lovely, Veronica. You've touched on so many different things that I'd love to explore, not least of which is thinking about museums and other civic institutions as not merely being repositories of artifacts, but as places in the community that people can gather to heal, really, and what a beautiful picture you've mentioned. You also brought up an issue which is extremely important to WHO, and that's the evidence base, the research. And what I found one Cochrane review on arts interventions for dementia, but haven't seen much systematic beyond that. And in that one, from a WHO point of view, I think we can say that there's some promising information there, but certainly the research agenda is far from over in this topic. The one thing that I felt was absent from the Cochrane review and is this notion of prevention. You talked about some evidence that you've experienced of the arts being able to slow the progress of the disease. But I wonder if it might be fertile exploration for the future to see if the arts can actually have a preventative effect in some way. I have no idea. I haven't seen it.
Yes, I think Keith's a good example of that. It's the approach, isn't it, that you take. It's kind of a combination. It's the involvement, the spiritual uplift. I mean, if you go into a church, for example, and you're hearing, I know where it's visual arts, let's say stained glass, and you're hearing music. It's the aesthetic. It's the aesthetic of the aesthetics, the sound that magnifies it, plus the spirituality. You go into a museum. I mean, I always feel the feeling in that museum, because very often, at least the interior, the architecture is so inspiring. I mean, this woman, as she walked in, she just looked dreadful. Sorry, but she did look dreadful. But when she walked inside, her face just lit up. And that's just how one feels. You know, you've had the London Tube or whatever it is, or wherever it is you're coming from. And our museums give you that place of that space to reflect, that space to imagine more. And when you can share it with other people, all the better.
Well, I also found it very beautiful how you mentioned church as well, because I often feel that religion, the arts, and the medical profession share one important strand of common DNA, if I could call it that, and that's this notion of compassion, of people struggling together, compassio, struggle together towards a common goal. And we like in our modern society to define ourselves by the differences we have with other professions. And certainly, you know, I would not equate religion with science, with art. They're separate for reasons. But I think that one thing that they have in common is quite interesting, quite powerful. Keith, I'm wondering if you could actually comment, you know, recognizing that your experiences doesn't necessarily apply to everybody, but what is your sense in terms of your involvement with the arts and the progression of your disease? I know it's a very subjective question, and we're not asking for a a scientific answer. But in terms of your perception, do you feel that your involvement in the arts may have slowed the progression of your Alzheimer's?
Absolutely, without any doubt, Chris. And the evidence is there both in talking to me and in knowing me, but also it forms an important part of my care plan. If you look at my care plan does have the galantamine and the memantine on there. It does have the annual checkup with my GP. It does have my consultations with my psychiatrist, but also it has stuff with Jen. It also has arts projects. It also has encouraging me to write and to do other arts activities that I benefit from. So it's their fundamental part of my care plan. And I would suggest it ought to be common to many people's care plans as well. Often care plans become a crisis plan rather than a care plan. It's a means of reacting to the severe elements of dementia, whereas really if you can be more proactive and get in there earlier and get in there more effectively with the arts, I think that's important. And what Veronica was just saying about the galleries prompted a thought in my mind around the word, I think you may have used it, Chris, the word compassion, which is really important. But what beyond that, I would say, is the arts gives an opportunity for empathy as well, because it's so difficult. I know from my mother, who had dementia way before I had it and way before I had my own experience of it, I found it really hard as a son to empathize with my mother. Yeah. But when we could do that was when we would share the love of arts, because I could step inside her shoes only at that time. And I now recognize that with other people. If I go to the art gallery or the museum in Canterbury, which Jen and I have done many times, and we've looked at exhibits there, both in the museum and in the art gallery, and been inspired to do something using those exhibits, be it writing, be it drawing, be it singing, be it playing instruments, then that occasion of sharing that wonderful experience has enabled the supporter to step inside my shoes.
Well, and that notion of being able to step inside someone else's shoes is so critical to a deeper understanding of any issue. And I think there could be a lot more of it today in all subjects.
A link to that, Chris, what's good for people with dementia is good for everybody.
Well, exactly. And just to build on that a little bit, one of the reasons why I became interested in dementia too was when I saw a visual representation of what a dementia patient, an Alzheimer's patient who had a very rare form where it directly affected their visual cortex of how they see the world, it was almost identical to the way I see the world. And some of the issues that they were facing were identical to mine, even though our problems are the opposite. You know, their eyes were perfectly fine. It was their brains processing that visual information that was having difficulty. In my case, my optic nerve is pretty much shattered, but my visual cortex is fine. But the visual image of the world that we share is identical. And some of the issues and ways of compensating were also identical. And I felt a kind of kinship in that sense. Yes, it's not the same, but there was enough of a similarity where I felt
there are more parallels, Chris, than perhaps the public would realize in what you've just said, because so often the public will view someone with dementia as solely having a memory problem. Living with dementia is much more than just a memory problem.
Absolutely. It can be spatial, it can be time, it can be so many
mobility balance.
Yeah. And even your description of the pattern in the fog, which we're using as the title of this talk, even is a literal reality for me. You know, when I see the world, it is literally a fog, and having to navigate in that and finding my way is something that I can certainly sympathize with. And let me ask you, in your experience, did you get a sense with these arts interventions that you've been exposed to that there was a slowing of the progression of the condition at all, or was it more non-linear than that?
I don't think I got a sense of that, but I think that's probably because the people that we're supporting, like Diane was saying, are are quite advanced or more advanced in their disease state.
They've already gotten there. Yeah.
But one thing that I really noticed, well, two things actually. We did an art project with a cartoonist who came in, and he worked individually with people. And then they developed a collage of places where they'd lived, or houses, or things that had been important to them. And what the activity coordinator, when we reviewed the results of the project, was really interesting, is that people involved used language that they didn't normally access. So there was a greater use of language. But also there was a greater degree of social interaction and like buzz between people, however they were able to discuss or communicate what they were doing. So I've seen this in other things that we've done in others of our homes. There seems to be, it seems to support people either accessing language or expression that they may not have done for some time, but also that it drives social interaction, which is all part of well-being.
Exactly.
So it opens the door, I think, to things that you may feel have been lost or put aside.
And that, I think, is such an important message for our audience, that it's so understandable and it's so easy when there is no cure, when the decline is inevitable, to give up. And it's so important to remind people that well-being is not about curing a condition. Well-being is about how you live. And that is something that we can build on and find those moments of joy, and give people the skills and the support to make those discoveries, to find how they can be part of a community again, part of to communicate and struggle together. I'll give one very concrete example. In preparation for this event, I talked to a group called Elderflowers, which is a group of clinical clowns based in Scotland. And one of the stories I heard was on Valentine's Day, a clown came into a nursing home, and they were expressing this important idea in arts therapy of, instead of trying to cheer people up, you meet people where they are. You don't tell people how to feel. You help them express how they're feeling and then guide them on their journey. And the way this clown described what they did was, on Valentine's Day, she came in and looked very, very sad. And again, because of the heightened empathy, a lot of the dementia patients there felt that sadness and were wondering what was wrong. And the clown said, "It's Valentine's Day, and I didn't get any Valentine's Day card. Nobody loves me." And this one patient, this man who had been absolutely uncommunicative for weeks, knelt down in front of the clown, put his hands over his heart, and began to sing an Irish ballad. And it was this wonderful moment of compassion, of struggling together. It wasn't about cheering him up. It was almost giving him an opportunity to cheer the clown up. And I just thought that was a beautiful moment. So Diane, I'm going to ask the same question to you now, recognizing that the patients you were working with were in an advanced state of dementia as well, like Anne. Perhaps involvement in the arts, you couldn't really show a slowing of the progression because people were already in an advanced state. The wonderful moments that you described earlier of people beginning to find humor, beginning to express, beginning to communicate, were they sustained or were they just flickers?
Yes, it's an important question, and we did look quite carefully at this because within the groups, we did see this over a period of time. And bearing in mind that time is a very important issue because people were, well, some quite old, and you know, there was the sense always of how long will I be here? You know, that came out, and as a realistic concern. But within the group, there was quite a bit of interaction. Once people had been working together and using the clay or whatever it was they were doing, make pictures, just being together over some time, there was definitely an improvement in the communication. And we actually, we did actually measure that. And my friend Jenny, she is a psychologist, statistician, and we did find, let's say objectively, some improvement there. But we could see it. We could see the improvement in interaction and language. And that was notable, in fact, that people began to speak to each other, and, you know, through the artwork, but also actually speaking. Out of the group, we did not find that these benefits lasted too well. Now, that whether that was because when they get out of the group, they go back into a culture which unfortunately tends to be rather passive and rather negative. So they go back to the way they were before the group, not keeping that interaction going. What we would like to achieve is the in-group benefit and changes what we observed happening outside the group. Now, and I think that is a lot to do with, you know, our education of or discussion with the staff in the care homes, and because they, I mean, it's a difficult situation, they have a difficult job, they don't have enough time with people individually often. Some do, but I think most don't. So we would like to see the ability to maintain that communication and interaction outside groups going on as something which is normal in everyday life, because I really believe, and I think other people have seen this, the difference with people once they have got that moment of, you know, humor and magic or whatever, when they are actually interacting, is so important, and it's beautiful to see. And then to go back to the state we were in before is very sad to see. So there's a lot of complexity in this about the environment that people are in. So I think is extremely important. I think the environment around people with, in this case, long, you know, very advanced dementia, it's extremely important, and how to get that message across. I think we've still got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, indeed. I'd like to circle back now to Claudia. Did you learn anything from this conversation? And is there something you would like to ask the group? Because although you work in this field, it's a different aspect.
Yes, also because, you know, we work very far away from patients sometimes. I'm not a medical doctor. I work with like genetics and with wet lab work with computers. I don't have the interaction with patients. And yeah, I really think that we need more interaction with patients in research and at the universities, because we need to keep in mind why we are doing this work and why we are doing this research. This is a great motivation to move forward. Yeah, the humanity, the feeling, the emotion that is attached to this conversation is very precious. And And yes, I'm, as you said at the very beginning, I'm always fascinated by the human brain. We know so little about this organ, but it is amazing because when we lose something in our brain, as you said, there are other ways to compensate. And actually we realize that we have lost something and that the brain was so perfect and it is so perfect. And we need to study it more. And probably we need to also study a little bit more how these additional we need to study more how these things that we can do in life outside of like the standard classical medication can actually help and improve the condition, like the way of living for like patients.
Yes, we live in such a siloed society where all of our different professions define ourselves by how we're different, but there's so few opportunities to actually work across the silos. The artists say, oh, why should I measure something? I can feel if it works or not. And then the scientists say, what does it matter how it feels? So there's either an outcome or there isn't. And when in fact, both are needed. You know, we need to feel it. That's part of the way that we experience the world. And it's what affects how we choose to behave, what we remember, how we act on it. But at the same time, we need the scientific method because our feelings can deceive us. They can create biases that any of us can be fooled by. Working together, I think that's something that we need more of in this world, certainly. I'd like to ask the group now.
If I can add one thing. I think you are perfectly right, because, you know, in science, we need numbers to make statistics, and we need to quantify things. So all these studies related to how, for example, arts can impact on a condition, they are very difficult to be done because we need to quantify, and it is difficult to quantify, for example, even to quantify which type of activity you are doing, because art, like painting, is it the same as playing a piece of music? Do you quantify it at the same time, in the same way? It's difficult. So we need to quantify stuff. And without a quantification, we cannot reach a conclusive scientific, conclusion. But in the end of the day, we need to do these studies, that's true. But even if we don't have a scientific study that is saying that, yes, we have scientific proof that like art helps, well, actually, if we have the experience of people that that they can testify that this has helped them, well, why not to try? Because in the end of the day is an improvement of the quality of life. And this is what we want to achieve.
That's very well said. I'd like to ask the group in general, is there anything anyone wants to ask anyone else before we conclude? Any observation that you've gotten? Let's start with, I see Anne and I see Veronica. Let's start with Anne, and then we'll go to Veronica.
I just wanted to say an observation on what Claudia just said, that I absolutely agree, you know, that science needs the facts, and that some of these interventions, it is difficult to decide what would be the measurable outcomes. But because when I started my section on the talk on this, I started with medicines. I think that there are some things that we could, especially in certain areas of society where people are living with a dementia, like care homes, there are things that we could look at, whether these interventions reduced the request or the driving for the drugs that are used to reduce distress, because everything else is anecdotal. I mean, I can only attest to what I see, and I see people are calmer, more fulfilled. There are loads of conversations without words people had. There's more social interaction, but hopefully maybe there will be a bridge between this and science, because the door needs to be opened so that it's explored more thoroughly, I think. Just an observation.
Veronica?
Well, I think I have about 3 points. This year, we've been having a huge cross-sector campaign throughout each region of the NHS and Scotland, Ireland and Wales. And research is going to be taken forward by various PhDs, by various universities, using, for example, software that can record how much of the arts have taken up as and offset against repeated visits to GPs, A&E, and this sort of thing, and the effects of that. So this research is definitely going to be happening, but also to say that we observed that people kept coming to these weekly arts activities for early stage dementia for 3 years. And interestingly, Henry Simmons of Alzheimer's Scotland said happened to mention that too, quite separately. So there is clearly, it clearly does make an effect. And then to the extent that in Scotland, Henry is one of the people, Professor Craig Ritchie is heading the Brain Health Centre up in Scotland, where they're actually going to have pop-up brain health drop-in centres to help people who whether they're concerned about their brains or simply want to live better in order to prevent dementia. So there's a lot happening in the preventative agenda, and I think research to it, and particularly the recent International Social Prescribing Conference talks of people working across the sectors, across the government departments. So really it is brilliant that you're talking about this now, because there are going to be the facts that we want, and everybody's working together to work across sectors to get the very evidence that we seek.
Indeed. Sarah?
I wanted to ask a question to Claudia, because we've been talking a lot about how interventions are effective and how we want to measure that scientifically. But I was wondering if we can also take another approach by hearing about how effective the arts have been. Does that in any way help inform the science of where research should go and what theories might come as to the causes of dementia or the treatments of dementia from seeing such an effective treatment outside of medicines?
I think that question probably should be directed to an epidemiologist, to someone that does this type of research. So definitely questionnaires, for example, and talking with people and collecting feedback on the field, that is something that is done. That is a type of research that can be done, definitely. But probably we need to invest more. One of the things that we know, for example, is that there is this thing called cognitive reserve. So we know that people that have an active, mentally active life, and they are engaging in mental activities through their life, they are, I would say, at less risk for dementia because they have this cognitive reserve. We don't really know how it works. Yeah, it doesn't prevent completely dementia, but that definitely isn't help. And so, there are studies going on. They are extremely difficult to be done because you need to cut out all the other biases. And this is the problem. You need to quantify and remove the biases. And it's posing an issue.
Keith?
Yeah, I like everyone else, want a cure for dementia. It would please me, well, it would make such a difference to my life if I was able to take a pill and then become recovered. But at the moment, of course, that's not where we're at. And I sit within the Alzheimer's Society on their research network. And I have a position within that network which helps assess and judge applications, largely from universities, for funding for care and public health research. And the number of applications that have come through from universities over the years has increased both in quantity and in quality. There still isn't enough money spent on research generally in Alzheimer's and dementia generally, no question. There's even less money spent on research into the care aspect, of which the arts form a part of. And I'm a great champion for additional funding to go into that. And I hope maybe this event, this on this particular occasion, will help advance that cause. And if I can just say one more thing, which I think is a piece of interesting research. During COVID, we ran a project looking at both the visual arts and poetry for people with dementia. And it resulted in this book, the cover of which was designed by an undergraduate, and the artwork inside was created by people with dementia. There's an illustration of one of the centenarians' artwork. And I just want to share with you some comments from that project and one short poem, if I may. The short poem is a haiku. So this person with dementia captured this in just 17 syllables, which is a challenge for anybody. And this poem is called Friendship Matters, which I think is ingrained in what we're saying today. This is the poem. Friends pass through our lives, filling our hearts with love, stays with us forever. That's 17 syllables, which I think encapture life and certainly encapture friendship. And that was written by a person with dementia who had dementia for some time. Oh. Next, just some comments from that project, which I think, again, illustrate many of the points we've made this afternoon. Anne mentioned earlier about opening the door. I'm going to open the door now and let 15 people with dementia come in and join us, because this project was these 15 people. And this is what they would say to you if they were able to join us today, because this is what was written down. First of all, I've never tried poetry before. I've discovered I love it. Next person, my words and speech have noticeably improved since I started in this group, and my husband tells me this has been maintained. Next person, it has changed my life just by giving it a go. It has opened my mind to possibilities which I can try something new. And the fourth person's going to say this to you. When so many folks give up on you, you give up on yourself. To be given this chance to do this piece of creative art is beyond amazing. I'm now going to close the door and let those people leave.
That was wonderful, Keith. And in fact, it reminds me a little bit of some comments that Veronica made earlier about having to adjust the way you speak when you're dealing with people with dementia, of having shorter, clearer, more concrete sentences. To me, that's beautiful poetry. So maybe there's something about the poetic language that can be helpful for people with dementia, because it is so clear. It is so, at least
it gives structure. It gives structure, Chris, as well, which dementia removes. So poetry gives you a structure. And whilst we found the syllables challenging, we did manage it.
Keith, you wrote a brilliant poem in Dear Alzheimer's, which I love to quote. Can you, one can't ask someone with Alzheimer's to try and remember it, but it's completely, he's gone to get it. It is really worth it. It's a great postscript. Or
This poem was written to end a conference for the British Society of Psychologists. And I'd written the talk, and it was thought it was a pretty good talk, but it was a rubbish ending. So I thought I've got to come up with a better ending. And I wrote this to try and close that conference. And this closed the conference. And it was addressed to the British Society of Psychologists. It's called Give Me, I Will. Give me myself and I will be me. Give me an ear and I will speak. Give me patience and I will relax. Give me music and I will dance. Give me joy and I will laugh. Give me a way and I will follow. Give me a baton and I will share. Give me inspiration and I will excel. Give me teaching and I will learn. Give me truth and I will consider. Give me compassion and I will care. Give me identity and I will shine. Give me attachment and I will engage. Give me occupation and I'll be focused. Give me inclusion and I will belong. Give me comfort and I'll feel warmth. Give me love and I will thrive.
Well, that is absolutely beautiful. I think what I'll do now is, since we're in kind of a poetry mode, I'm going to close with a poem myself. And this is an excerpt from a well-known poem that reminds me a little bit of the foggy state that we talked about in Alzheimer's, but also it's a goodbye poem. So I think it might be appropriate to end on. Forlorn, the very word is like a bell to toll me back from thee to my soul self. Adieu, adieu, thy plaintive anthem fades over the still stream across the meadow, and now 'tis buried deep in the neighboring valley glades. Was it a vision or a waking dream? Fled is that music. Do I wake or sleep? Thank you, everybody. Take good care of yourselves.
Thank you very much.